So, good evening again, and a warm welcome back to another session in the series of Meeting an Expert. As Asia Pacific Institute of Information Technology, we are honored to host this session today with another panel of experts, especially in a time today where many discussions are held in governance about organic fertilizers, usage, and its provisions. So we warmly welcome all our students who are on platform today and all our members from partner universities joining from UK, Australia, and Thailand, and all the foreign delegates and diplomats who are joining us from all over the world, and all the other distinguished guests as well. To start off with the session today, we have Chairman of APIT Sri Lanka, Mr. Bandula Egodage, to share his wishes and expressions. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you, Kaushali. Thank you, Roshan, being with us today. In fact, this topic today is pretty much closer to my heart as well. In fact, myself and Dr. Rohan Tatukorala, we were together promoting Sri Lankan tea, talking about the same subject long time ago, and now we are both of us are in the same panel along with Roshan, and talking about 2 billion business in tea sector. It's quite appropriate and quite time bound topic that we are talking. Very warmly welcome you, Roshan, today. On behalf of our CEO Roshan Egodage and board of directors and all the student panels, the student population and all the teachers, some overseas participants who are connecting today with us, very warmly welcome you, and especially for your time. Thank you very much for being with us, Roshan. As you all know that APIT, you know what APIT is. Basically known for the quality education, but not only quality education. End of the day, whoever who is passing out, we want to develop our students for the extracurricular activities, mainly to build up the right leadership in their within them. So whole objective to give that opportunity to interact with people like person like you, opinion like you, opinion leaders like you, to get direct interaction. So I very kindly request all my student population to get the maximum out of Mr. Roshan Rajadori and get a lot of hard interaction and have a nice discussion in another 30 to 45 minutes. So once again, without further doing, thank you for Rohanta for this great initiative, and thank you for being with us, Roshan, for this one. So all over to you, Rohanta and Roshan. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much. And that was Chairman of the Industrial Association of Sri Lanka, the Vice President for Nestle, and of course, we have a very eminent group of speakers today. I like to actually introduce my very good friend, who actually is, to be very honest, a pillar in the plantation industry. And of course, we also have a guest who is going to join us from UK, Edmund Temple, who happens to be another very strong proponent of good agriculture. So welcome. But let me first of all introduce Roshan Rajadori, MD Plantations, Hayleys Group, former chairman, Planters Association of Sri Lanka. Roshan Rajaduri joined the plantation sector in 1983 and counts for 39 years of planting experience. He was an estate group manager for Hayleys, Keleni Valley Plantations, and Nuvarelia. In 2002, he joined the Kahawatha Plantations of Dilma and was director CEO from 2008 to 2012. He rejoined Hayleys in 2013 as the Hayleys Group Management Committee member for plantain sector and is responsible for Keleni Valley, Talawakale, and Horror Plantations. He has been the chairman of the Planters Association of Ceylon, board member of the Sri Lanka Tea Board, Tea Research Institute, Rubber Research Institute, Tea Small Holdings Development Authority, and the Tea Council of Sri Lanka. He is the co-chairman of the Sri Lanka Roadmap Strategy 2030. He served the Standing Committee of Agriculture of the University Grants Commission. Roshan holds a BSc in Honours in Plantation Management, an MBA and an MSc in Agriculture and Plantation Crops from the Postgraduate Institute of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya. He has a PhD in Management and is also a DSc in Agriculture. Roshan is not just scope of just being MD of a large plantation company, one of the top companies in Sri Lanka, but he's also a person who is very, very vocal. And last week, when we had this whole debacle of this fertilizer issue, he went to the media and shared a very important piece of work. And let me tell you that the Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture actually used that piece of data in convincing the policymakers and the hierarchy of the need to move into a short-term remedy, which actually he will talk about. It's actually a legend of Sri Lanka. And Dr. Roshan Rajadurai, today is a very important day because today is the 50th CEO MBA diary that we are having. So far we have had the chairperson of Unilever, Haja Alifafi. We have had the managing director of Nestle. We have had the ambassador for UK, Saroja Sirisena. We have had the ambassador for Singapore in Sri Lanka, in Sri Lankan ambassador in Singapore, Shashikala Premawardana. We had the ambassador for Sri Lanka in China, people like Dr. Palita Komana, my former boss. Then we had, the Simon Arnold, the famous Simon Arnold, who runs brand finance from London. Then we had, speakers in the caliber of Michael McDonald, the greatest professor, once again out of London. I mean, we have all top bankers of the Standard Chartered Bank. We had bankers from the NDB CEO. Day in and day out, you had all the top CEOs coming in for this MBA diaries. But today is very special. 50th CEO of during the last 1 year, and it's a very special person, a person whom Sri Lanka is proud about, Dr. Roshan Rajadurai. Over to you, Roshan.
Right. Thank you, Rohanta. Thank you for that very nice introduction. I really feel humbled that I'm following the footsteps of such illustrious persons who have gone before me. I hope I do justice for the time you have given me. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all of you. Because of the brevity of time that had been allocated, I want to be very brief and succinct in what I say. The tea industry, I think, is a very, very close, an industry that is close to our hearts, especially for Sri Lankans. We have had a proud history of over 167 years since the commercial tea plantations were established, and the industry, with a lot of challenges, with a lot of difficulties and vicissitudes brought upon by humans and other elements, have continued to progress, albeit at some times at a slow pace. But today, present times, it poses a huge challenge for us. The topic given to me today is, can Sri Lanka be a $2 billion industry? Currently, we earn about $1.4 billion of foreign exchange. And in answering the question, I'll give a very short answer. Yes, it can. And it must, but with certain preconditions. Why I say that there are some preconditions to meet this is I want to very, very briefly explain the history and the background of the tea industry, because in my interactions with many spheres of people, both within Sri Lanka and outside, I realized that they have very brief knowledge about the history of the tea industry. So permit me to take about 5 or 10 minutes to digress from the main topic itself and take you back to history. You know, Sri Lanka started its plantation enterprise for the first time in our country because we had a subsistence agriculture Then with the introduction of coffee as a commercial crop, the plantation industry took a hold in Sri Lanka. Coffee was a very profitable crop at that time until about 1860s. It had its ups and downs depending on the markets and the climate. And Sri Lanka used to get seasonal influx of workers from India. Now the plantation workers of Indian origin have a very colorful history. They are a very emotive and a very sentimental subject, and so much of debate and controversy has surrounded this community of people. There are a lot of stories about they were indentured, they were, like they say, at one time they were bound, shackled workers serving long servitude. But the reality is, at the time that the coffee industry collapsed, until such time, Sri Lanka was a happy hunting ground for many Indian migrant workers. They used to come to Sri Lanka on 2 occasions during harvest times, earn a lot of money and get back to India. But with the collapse of the coffee industry, tea industry came into being, and it needed year-long employment. And right at that time, in the 1860s, if you go back in history, India had a calamitous drought in South India, where about 6 to 10 million people died. And in any case, the people who used to come to Sri Lanka were poor. They had no regular income, mostly on starvation level. And because of regular pandemics and diseases, there was a lot of victims and a lot of, how shall I say, a lot of deaths. So opening of the tea plantations with regular year-round work with almost double the salary that they gave in India was a good opportunity. And that's how the tea plantation industry and the migration of the South Indian workers started to Sri Lanka. Naturally, the conditions of employment, conditions of living, food security, particularly rice that the British planters brought from India at subsistence, at concession rate and gave them, was a very big pull factor to Sri Lanka. And the push factor in India was famines and starvation and pestilences. So this is how the tea industry started. And of course, by about after 3 or 4 decades, it got established, and then the rest is history. So since 1992, since the estates were privatized again, initially in the 1975 era, the government nationalized the plantations. Even at that time, contrary to popular belief, only about 25% of the plantations were owned by British planting interests. Rest were owned by Sri Lankan companies and private enterprise individual owners. But for reasons best known at that time, the government of Sri Lanka nationalized the plantations. And for 25 years, from 72 to about 92, the plantations were managed by the government. That is the corporate sector. In 92, very briefly, the estates were running at such a huge loss that the government was compelled to re-privatize again to 20 regional plantation companies. So that's the corporate sector. If you look at the tea sector in Sri Lanka, you can find 2 very distinct segments. One is a smallholder sector. They started small in the 1950s because private enterprise, particularly cultivation in tea, was not encouraged. It was a preserve of the large companies. But with the nationalization of estates and thereafter with the privatization of estates in 1990s, the government was able to pour in a lot of money, particularly the money that they used to give subsidies to the large estate up till 1992. They diverted that money to the smallholder sector in terms of giving subsidies and other assistance. And today, 76% of our production comes from the smallholder sector. So the driving force of our tea economy today is not the large companies, or we call it the corporate sector with large estates, but it's a smallholder sector. We have about 450,000 operators, as we call, in the smallholder sector. And about 90% of them, these small operators or small landowners, have land less than 80 purchase in extent. So it's really a small holding compared to the smallholders of India or Vietnam or Kenya, other countries. The large corporate estates have 24% of the production, having about 36% of the land area. Another distinction is that the smallholder sector is more or less concentrated in the low grown and in the mid grown. Large corporate estates are predominant in the high grown areas, and their product type, their management systems, the agriculture practices, even their made tea product has differences. So there are two streams of production in Sri Lanka's plantation sector, although we sell our tea at the auctions on the same day to almost the same buyers. So that's the general background. And in the plantation sector, around 1 million people, I'm talking the corporate sector, 1 million people are resident. Now, another feature of this system is that we still continue with the 150-odd-year-old attendance-based wage system, whereas most countries in the world, mainly the tea economies, have migrated to a productivity-based system. So because of political considerations, we have not been able to break away from this system, because this is a very politically sensitive industry, and any industry related decision that we take has other ramifications, and we have to always operate in a sort of a network where we do not upset the balance of socio-economic or community or political consideration. So of these 1 million people resident in the plantations, only 125,000 people contribute their labor to the estate enterprise. That means for every one worker resident on the estate, there are 7 dependents or non-workers who avail themselves of the facility of free health, housing, welfare, sanitation, and all the other amenities that are going along with community living. So that's the background. The smallholders, about 80% of these 450,000 people are hired labor, right? So that's how the mix is. Now coming back to the industry as a whole, all the tea in Sri Lanka is mandated to be sold at the auction with certain conditions. And the issue now that we face is Sri Lanka has traditionally been an orthodox tea producing country, whereas other countries have gone into CTC production. Those are more user-friendly tea, because the consumers can make a cup of tea quicker, faster, and disposal of the tea leaf is much better. So there are advantages in that kind of a product as opposed to orthodox black tea. But up to now, although Sri Lanka is paying the highest labor wage component in all the tea economies, just for comparison, we pay the highest wage of 1,150 per day, whereas even now, even India in Assam, which is a large tea producing area, producing almost twice as much as our national production, their labor wage is less than 400 rupees, and they have to pluck minimum 35 kilos to qualify for this in Sri Lankan rupees, about 450 rupees. Whereas in Sri Lanka, we have to pay 1,150 rupees for 18 kilos. So you would understand the economics. So we are not competitive in global markets in terms of costs, and we have so many other social welfare programs, and some are statutory and traditional that add on to our cost. And as a result, our tea is the highest cost tea in the world. So we cannot really compete in the global markets with our cost. But how we have survived as an industry is our tea is well known for its uniqueness because of our geographical size, or because of our spatial differences in agriculture. We have very small, ours is a very small country, and tea is grown in a limited area. As a result, our estates are comparatively smaller in size to Indian or Kenyan estates. So that place to place, every 100 yards or every half a kilometer, there is a difference in soil and climate and the topography that lends itself to unique characteristics that are in our tea, and no tea is equal to another tea in the same region. So that is the uniqueness, that speciality, that differentiation is the thing that keeps our industry competitive in the global markets. Apart from that, Ceylon is very well known for strict compliance to good agricultural practices, sustainable environmental practices, then ethical tea partnership has confirmed almost all our estates in terms of how we look after our workers and the social welfare benefits. And we are the most certified tea nation in the world in terms of Rainforest Alliance, in terms of FSC certifications, and so many product certifications. So this is the competitive edge that we have over the other tea economies. to be in business for so long. But in going forward, we can clearly foresee a challenge because for over 100 years, the British plantation interests owned Sri Lankan tea estates, and they had a well-established network, a supply chain, and that supply chain is dismantling it very fast. I'm sure most of you will be surprised to know that UK, which is a premier tea consuming country, who import about 150 million kilos of tea into their country, imports only less than 1 million kilos of Ceylon tea. Britain was the home of Ceylon tea, but because of other uh, competitive forces and because of ownership issues, now Britain is just a very, very small importer of Ceylon tea. On the other hand, our major markets are in the Middle East and in the Russian Federation. Almost 70% of our tea is sold in these two markets, mainly the Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, those Middle Eastern countries, and the Russian Federation. So with it comes attendant uncertainty. When the oil prices are good and when there is political stability and economic development, tea will get a good price. When there is instability, when the oil price drops, then we get the impact of those disturbances in the tea economy. Whereas we should be having a very big niche or very big market share in premier markets like Japan and EU and perhaps in the US. We do not have that kind of a market leverage in those countries because traditionally, as I mentioned earlier, 76% of our tea is low grown, and that type of product is ideally suited for the Middle Eastern and Russian markets where they like very strong, full-bodied tea as opposed to the light, bright, the tea bag type of tea that the other countries prefer. So that is the makeup of our market. And we notice that more and more countries are now diverting away from the laborious process of brewing the tea, as we call it, with our type of tea, and moving into tea bags and other types of tea products. So the tea economy in the world is about $43 billion, of which we are struggling or we are trying to carve out a niche of about $2 billion. Compared to tea, although tea is consumed more than coffee, the coffee market is about 76 billion. Coffee is a more pricey, more trendy beverage. It is because of the marketing. I think if you go back 100 years, tea was supposed to be the drink of rich people. People could not afford tea, but over time, the coffee market has really specialized in leveraging and positioning itself, and coffee is now becoming the drink of choice. So this is a challenge that tea as a beverage is facing. And coming back to the Sri Lankan scenario, right? As I told you that we have already external or exogenous challenges of marketing costs. Our traditional markets, we are losing some of the traditional markets and some of the premier markets, for example, like Japan, where we had a very good position. We lost that because of inconsistent government policy. You will recall that a couple of years back, the government banned the use of a very popular, very safe herbicide, again based on some sort of a misinformation. And the Japanese government, the high officials from that country came and met with the highest in the land at that time and convinced them that to allow Sri Lanka to use that herbicide, which is harmless and which is widely used. But unfortunately, the government was adamant and we were not able to use it. As a result, we had to use some alternate, and that was not permitted in Japan, and thereby hangs a tail. We lost a premier share of the Japanese market. So while we have challenges, some of which are beyond our control, we have gone and shot ourselves in the foot and caused even further damage to our positioning and our markets as regards to tea. So one of the things I just want to give a quick background and open myself to questions because the subject is very vast. One of the reasons that the tea market is sluggish, we hover around $1.3, $1.4 billion. I very categorically said we can go to 2 billion, but there are certain things that need to happen on the way. What we have realized is the prices that we receive at the auction and the FOB price, there's a huge disparity. Currently, earlier it used to be about 25 to 30% of value addition to the auction price. Now it is 50%. So we really believe the producers. I like to talk more on the producer aspect of the tea industry. The producers would like to have a more equitable share of this tea market, because a producer, whether it's a smallholder, whether it's a large corporate, has a triple burden. The producer has to care for the environment, the soil, the water, the ecosystem in terms of the crop, because it's a perennial crop, a vegetative crop. A slight change in the climate or the weather or soil or water conditions will have a significant effect not only on the crop but on the quality. So the producer has to be always very cautious, very conscious about the way he manages his agricultural practices in order to get the optimum crop. Having done that, then the burden again is on the producer to ensure that the tea is produced following good manufacturing practices. And we are now mandated to have so many global certificates, ISO, HACCP, and all the certificates related to food quality. So that is a huge burden and a challenge and a responsibility to the producer. In addition to that, in addition to looking after the soil and the land and the water and the product, in between we have to look after the people engaged in the industry. Mainly the corporate sector. From the time a lady delivers or lady confirms a pregnancy up to the time the child is 5 years old, there is total maternal care and total custodial child care. So that burden of providing health, medical, welfare, educational facilities, housing, sanitation, and all the community perquisites and facilities that associate with large populations living in centralized locations also is a burden on the producer. So the producer has a triple burden. And when you look at the prices at the auctions and the prices that the teas are sold at the supermarket, there's a huge disparity. Sometime back, there was a study done in the UK by an organization called War on Want. It showed that almost 40% plus of the profits are taken by the supermarket retailers. On the other end of the scale, the producer, if there is a profit, he gets only 1%. So this is the disparity, this unequal sharing of the benefits of the industry is one thing that is holding back the further development and expansion of the tea industry, particularly at the producer level. Second thing in going for this $2 billion target is that we really need to move away from the traditional product portfolio. When you look at Sri Lankan product, after even 150 years, we still sell more than almost 50% of our product in bulk form. In other words, in larger than 10 kilo packs. Only about 7% of our produce is sold as tea bags and a further 1% as green tea. So basically less than 10% of our product is sold as a value-added form. So we are still selling tea as a commodity. Normally, Sri Lankan tea prices keep on increasing marginally year on year, but in between we suddenly have years that the prices in fact are lower than the previous years. A case in point is in 2018, we used to sell a kilo of tea at the auction. The producer got about 620 rupees per kilo of tea, but having given a 35% wage increase with all the other attendant costs, 2 years hence, the tea prices come down to 550. So on the one hand, the producer and those engaged in the industry have to incur a higher cost, while there's an expectation that at least a compensatory increase in the price is given to a producer, we see something completely opposite. In fact, the price drops. So this is the dilemma that the producer has to constantly face, coupled with the challenge that he has to encounter with erratic climate and with the climate change effects that we have. These are very frequent and very, very extreme. So these are the challenges in terms of the producers that is hindering him going towards this high production. And I think Sri Lankan government has very ambitiously put a target of achieving 350 million kilos of production. As a practitioner, I have to have some sort of a doubt about it, because if you analyze the figures up till about 2015, until the glyphosate ban fiasco took place, Sri Lanka used to produce about 330, 340 million kilos in a good year, give or take 5% related to weather and other industrial effects. But since then, our production is coming down, and last year we produced only 280 million kilos. The reason is that because of the economics, because of the viability, about 10% of the tea land has been left or abandoned, if I call it. We had about 220,000 hectares in cultivation. Now it has come down to 200,000 hectares, almost 20,000 hectares loss of tea land, about 10% of the tea land. And in terms of prices, in order to achieve this 2 billion, even a year or two, yes, if we can get about $6.5 to $7, we can easily achieve, provided we maintain this 300 billion kilo production. So two issues. One is a 300 billion kilo production, but as Rohan explained, recently we had another setback in terms of government policy, where they went and banned all sorts of agricultural inputs, not only fertilizer, but as well as agrochemicals. That has a very direct and significant impact on the tea industry. So I will just stop there because and answer your questions. But I'm not predicting doom. The Sri Lankan tea industry over the years, in spite of the huge wage increases and other challenges, have sustained itself and provided employment to over 800,000 people directly, and indirectly all the hundreds and thousands of village economies and bazaars in where the state plantation agriculture is present. That is the only economic life stream, the plantation agriculture and plantation industry. We have sustained not only the plantation sector, but villages and bazaars. We can reach this target, provided that we take a very pragmatic, very practical approach. One is on the side of production. We need to maintain this 300,000. That is a more doable target because of climate change and reduction in land area. And of course, year on year, keep on improving the price for a kilo of tea, going up to about $6.5 to $7. In reaching that, there should be some incentive, some motivation, some pull factor for the producer to produce more. That is that can be only done by getting the producer higher price at the Colombo auctions. I know we are talking of these 2 billion rupees at the point of export, but of that, if you analyze, about 50% is a value addition after the auction. So that really, that money doesn't go down to the producer to be distributed among the stakeholders in the industry. So those are the key areas. In order to increase the price, we need to develop a different product portfolio, to look at new markets, to go away from the traditional markets, because the older generations that were used to the quality Ceylon tea are now slowly moving away, and the younger generations are looking at different aspects of the tea beverage, which the marketing and brand owners will have to come up with, because there is a expectation that the producer has to do this part. But I think there is in the supply chain, the producer can do up to a certain level, but thereafter someone else has to take the baton and move forward. So with that, Rohantha, with that very brief introduction about the industry, I will stop now and open myself to any questions. That way I'll be able to interact and explain the situation further.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roshan Rajadori. I mean, amazing synopsis that covers the total supply chain, and also you covered the demand chain. I mean, it's real amazing summary, which, I mean, without a piece of paper, you did that, which is like outstanding. Thank you so much. Roshan, I mean, we're actually having another guest today, Edward Hempel, who happens to be the chairman of the Carbon Keepers UK and Sri Lanka. But then I thought I need to do justice, given the challenges that this industry had, and all the share of media that was there in the last 3 weeks, and the questions that were coming in. Believe me, I got more than about 400 to 450 questions from different people. And as we speak today, this particular program is going on 3 different platforms. And I just got information that we have crossed 350 plus kind of people watching from different platforms. So, I mean, greetings to everybody from all over the world. There are ambassadors who are listening, and there are people who love this industry who's watching. So, thank you very much for that excellent overview. Roshan, do you honestly believe, I mean, given the challenges that we have, that we actually can be a 2 billion industry, let's assume, I mean, in the next 5 years?
Yes, we can. Why I say that is, I'll just take you back into history. Easiest for me is to compare ourselves the corporate sector, because that is the most challenging sector, because the tea smallholder sector is in the hands of private entrepreneurs. In the tea industry, there are 3 segments. One is a corporate sector who grow the tea, who produce the tea, and then we sell it at the auction. Then there's another distinct segment called the tea smallholders. They only cultivate the tea. Of course, they are supported by a network of leaf collectors. So I can put that in the producer sector. Then we have almost 500 private tea factory owners. A handful of them may own tea, but basically they're a distinct group manufacturing only leaf sourced from tea smallholders. And of course, we have the buyers and sellers and the marketing side of it. Now, if you look at the corporate sector, that is where Sri Lanka tea is known for. As I told you, we have almost 700 certifications for about 200 factories. All the certificates that you can imagine in terms of environment, quality, human resources, we have it. Now, when we privatized in 1992, the labor wage, because labor wage, why I keep on going back to the labor wage, in the tea cost of production, 70% is the cost of labor. The cost of production is 100 rupees, 70 rupees is spent on the direct labor. So when we privatized in 1992, the labor wage per day was 58 rupees. And the price of a kilo of tea was 60 rupees. Basically, almost the value of a kilo of tea was more than 100% of the labor wage. But today, come down to 25 years, we pay 1,150 minimum wage, and then we sell a kilo of tea about 550 to 560 rupees. So given this enormous challenge, now the revenue we earn is halved, or the other way, the labor wage is double. Whatever you look at it, the tea prices have not increased at the same pace that the labor wage, which is 70%, and other costs have increased. All over the world, not only in Sri Lanka, if you consider the tea, because it's a very labor intensive, it's a very artisanal industry, labor wage is the biggest component of the cost of production. So given these challenges, and particularly in Sri Lanka, given the constraints, although we are privatized, we have so many constraints in terms of diversifications. The spirit and the law of the privatization initiative is not observed in full. Now we were given permission to diversify uneconomic tea land or rubber land. And rubber was a crop well suited for the last century, because at that time the land was more suitable. But over 100 years, after 3 rounds of rubber, some lands have become infertile and not suitable for rubber because of rainfall. So oil palm is a very, very lucrative, very appropriate crop, right? And being corporates, all the large blue chip companies own estates, and the corporate culture, we are very rule bound, we are very conformant to all the requirements, every requirement. So oil palm was introduced as an alternate, but of course, again, government policy. So these are the challenges we have. In spite of these challenges, the tea industry has continued to develop, continued to be in existence. And I'm sure if the government has a supportive policy framework, and if the stakeholders, mainly the unions, agree to work as partners in terms of giving a wage model that really benefits the workers and gives them far more opportunity that they are having now for the workers to earn more, we have a very good future. We can do it, and we have shown with all the challenges, with all the roadblocks, with all the shackles that we have been able to maintain the industry for over 150 years. There may be ups and downs, but if you take a line, we can.
But Dr. Rajadori, we were at about, I think, 320 million kilograms of tree. In terms of production, I think 328, if I'm not mistaken. I was part of that president-appointed committee to evaluate the effectiveness of the private sector after privatization, after 10 years. And then it came down from 328, it became 300. And then from 300, it came down, as you say, 298 million kilograms of tea. So, I mean, this last decision about the fertilizer really took this industry to the wire. So, you see that constantly policymakers are not supporting this industry. So, my question is that how do we look at this issue of the fertilizer, doctor?
Okay. Just before I come to the issue of fertilizer, everyone keeps on asking about the drop in production. It's a fact that we have dropped production. Last year was particularly bad because of the drought, but we are less than 300 billion kilos, down from about 340, one of our best years. Two reasons. One is the land under tea cultivation is diminished. As I told you, 20,000 hectares, 10% drop in land under cultivation. Number two, the people engaged in the industry are moving. They are out migrating from the industry, which is a natural social phenomenon, not only in Sri Lanka, all over the world. A farmer's child would definitely not wish to do the same manual job that his father would do. So there are aspirations, hopes, and expectations in the families of tea operators, and they keep out migrating from the tea industry, and naturally we are left with the more older, more veteran generation. A case in point is, again, I come back to the issues that we know very well. When we privatized the estates in 1992, we had a workforce of 327,000 people. Today, the latest figure is 120,000 people. That is because the people expect a life outside agriculture. Education is free in Sri Lanka. Health is free in Sri Lanka. There's a very good telecommunication and information technology network. Transport is accessible. Ours is a small country. So people have ample opportunities to move out of the state. And of course, unlike 2 or 3 decades back, the how shall I say, the ethnic issue is sorted out. Take 30 years back, the plantation worker would not know to talk in single, and distinctively you can identify him as from another ethnic group. But today, when you see a youngster from upcountry, you would not see him apart from a boy or girl from Colombo. So they have equal opportunity. They have access to government services. So there's a social transformation. We as operators understand this, and we do not expect the children of the workers to get stuck to the estate. And that is why we have offered an entrepreneurial wage model where, without the strict, tight supervision, something like the smallholder model, that they feel that they are their own bosses and they are not subject to somebody else's supervision. Unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, the unions have rejected. Had they taken it, the workers would have sort of felt that they are also equal citizens and like smallholders. There is a lot of dignity in smallholders. People are proud to say we are smallholders. So they are not anybody's servant or anybody's employee. They are their own masters. So that's a social transformation that has taken place, that impacts on the land being reduced. As a consequence, the crop comes down, cost goes up, it has an impact on quality. So all these things directly have an impact. We cannot say that it is in isolation. One thing leads to another. It's a domino effect. So that is the overall background. But in terms of the agriculture, the government issue that you talked about, unfortunately in Sri Lanka, politics, sentiment has a higher say than fact and how shall I say, financial and commercial realities on the ground. Even the glyphosate issue, right? All the medical councils, nephrologists, scientists, World Health Organization committees, they have, said in no uncertain terms that there is no connection between CKDU and chemicals. Of course, if anything, not only chemicals, anything in excess to recommendation would cause an issue. But having said that, unfortunately, the government at that time, for whatever reason, for other reasons other than agriculture or science, banned it. And we have still not recovered from the after effects of it. People had to abandon tea land. And now the latest decision, I'm thankful that at least at this late hour, before everything is lost, there is some sort of a stepping back from the abyss and taking a more positive outlook and permitting the plantation industry to import compound fertilizers, we are told. So what I am told is that the TRI is working out the formulations and the quantities, and we are grateful, even though we had to suffer a lot and definitely we'll have to face the consequences in the future. We are grateful for the decision, at least just before the abyss, that the government has taken a step back and relented on the decision to ban all types of synthetic agrochemical or agriculture inputs into the tea and rubber. Now, rubber is a good case in point.
Yeah, Doctor, what is the cost of that decision in terms of kilograms, approximately?
Right. Yes. All science, all practice, and all research confirms that without fertilizer, long term, not a month or two, then of course the physical effects are manifested. But if you continue that, definitely we lose about 40% of our crop, because fertilizer is a very, very complex issue. You just cannot put anything to tea, particularly it's a vegetative crop, it's a perennial crop over 100 years, and it's like a Rubik's Cube. You change one phase of it, then everything changes. So fertilizer has an impact on production. It has an impact on productivity, individual productivity, that has an impact on work earnings, their quality of life, their standard of living. It has an impact on quality of Ceylon tea. People are used to a certain quality of Ceylon tea, and there are chemical elements that directly contribute to the quality, the color, the appearance, the taste, the flavor, so many aspects of this brew that we drink, right? That the tea leaf has chemical constituents that automatically lends the inherent character and flavor. Otherwise, you can boil a Coscola or anything and make a brew. You can't. So other thing, other than the quality, other than the production, then we have the herbicide issue. If you do not use the recommended herbicides and control the weeds, then you would lose about 30% of our crop. That is very well established. Then we need very, very basic standard fungicides to control the fungal diseases. With the rain, with the humid and tropical climate we have, this is quite common that we have fungal diseases, and it easily managed. Over 50-60 years we have managed it very easily with spraying of something called copper oxychloride, right? And then we use nematicides. Now there is this talk of, in Sinhala they say vasa visa. I think this is absolute myth. It's wrong information, because tea being a brew is subject to many stringent, what do you call, maximum residue levels, any type, whether it's copper or fertilizer, anything that we apply, especially Japan, the EU countries, US, they are very stringent. Some are so stringent that we cannot use any chemical. Basically, we can't use chemical. So over last 25 years, if you have fulfilled all their qualifying parameters, we haven't, you all would have read in the newspapers that we have a problem. We have no problem. So basically, that is a manifestation of the fact that Sri Lankan tea industry has conformed to all the requirements, meaning we have used the minimum on recommended basis and fulfill all obligations and expectations. So there is no problem. We created a problem that was never there. But again, as I say, whatever it is, as a practitioner, I'm really grateful to the powers that even at this hour, they have relented and had a change of heart in permitting.
Doctor, I mean, let's be very clear. There were 32 professors and heads of agricultural universities who wrote to the president and said, don't do it. And the fact of the matter is that it was thrown to the bin until you wrote that article in the Daily Mirror, and it was taken by the secretary for decision making. It was a bit of a stalemate. So my question to you is, you have a set of youngsters doing MBA. And I remember when you were doing your masters at Peradeniya University, you used to call me to come in as a guest speaker, and I was so humbled at that time. But what is the advice, Dr. Rajadori, you can give these youngsters? We have about 400 yeah, top end corporate sectors, starting from the Brandicks and the MAs of the world, right across to the top BPOs, all in the Staffordshire MBA program. What advice would you give to these youngsters of this chaotic decision making that happens in a country? And how do, with your kind of wisdom of being also a former chairman of the Planters Association, how do you deal with this policy making through successive governments? It's nothing to do with a government, it's successive governments. How do you deal with wrong policy making, and what advice can you give to this 400 base classroom of MBAs, Dr. Rajadurai?
Right. Thank you, Rohan. I think I must correct something. I was not a lone voice crying in the wilderness. There were hundreds of unnamed, unknown people and some very well known people who took up the cause without any personal or professional or commercial benefit, who spoke up and showed reason. I'm sure most of them, and mostly, almost exclusively government employees, and I really respect them. I salute them because they had more to lose, but they had the courage of their convictions. They had character to come out and say something in the large interests of the country and the population, obviously. My take on this is that all top management or all big corporates or whatever country, the leaders don't know everything. They rely on expertise, experienced people, and it is up to those people to give the right advice to their leadership. Right? I mean, it's practical. We do not know everything. We know so little, so we rely on other people to give us the right advice. And that is where I think we made a mistake. The people who should have given the right advice, for whatever reason, they didn't have the courage of their convictions. If they don't know the subject, they should have owned up and said, let's get somebody, researcher or professor from the university who knows the subject, and just stepped aside. So my advice to youngsters, we all face situations like this in life, in our professional life, in our personal life. I think you have to look at yourself in the mirror and take a call personally and speak up, speak the truth. It may cost you a lot. Some of us are very fortunate. We have no repercussions. You are in the private sector, but I don't think that is the case for everybody. Some people have paid a very high price, but I think at this dark moment, we must stand up and count the people who took a stand. And so, I mean, I'm not involved in politics, but when they knew that they were not listened to, or that the direction the decision was going was not right, they had the courage to step back or resign. So I must pay a tribute to a lot of people, so many people who have done far more than just my piece of paper, standing up for these issues and ensuring that long-term interest, it's not a short-term benefit of the country, is looked after. So youngsters, whenever you have the opportunity, right, if it's not a matter of life and death, I think you must stiffen your back and face the truth and tell the truth. I'm sure in the long term, people who listen to that will appreciate it and acknowledge it. It may not be immediate. That's the only advice. Just face the facts and convey the facts. If you have a long-term interest of the subject.
Going back to I'm moving the discussion to another point, which is it says that almost 90% of the corporate sector tea stock happens to be above almost 60 years. But then my dad tells me, I'm a tea planter. He keeps telling me that 1 square hectare of land to kind of replant, you might have to spend almost like 3-4 million rupees right now. So now, which means that, in other words, that the life cycle of a tea is now depleting in the corporate sector. As you said, it was about 25 to 27, 26% or 30% of Sri Lanka. But of course, the people who actually movers and shakers of business, like yourself. So, what is the remedy that you could give to this? Because you know that when you look at the bottom line, Dr. Rajadori, you can't afford to do the replanting. There is no money. So, how do you handle this catch-22 situation that the country is in?
Okay, that's a very common question that a lot of forums people keep asking. There's a misconception also. When the estates were replanting or vegetatively propagated tea as opposed to seedling tea came into being in the 1950s, and when the companies were privatized, we had 17% of our stock in VP, what we call vegetatively propagated tea. Currently, we have gone up to 65%. Meaning that we have identified the most suitable land and converted that into high yielding tea. Now, seedling tea, for example, if it gives 1000 kilos yield, the VP tea would definitely give about 2500 kilos tea. So the ratio is 1 to 2.5. So it's really a viable commercial option to have VP. Then the pluckers can earn more, the estate will get a high yield and cost will come down. That is number one. Number two is most of the land that are suitable for replanting have been identified and have been replanted, and the balanced land is not suitable, either steep, eroded, and not in proper geographical condition to replant. So those lands you have to identify and perhaps put into more commercially viable crops like fuel wood. Fuel wood is a requirement in the plantations, not only plantations, in bakery, so many other industries, it is a requirement. So we can convert that to other useful, less harmful commercial crop cultivation. Third thing is, as you mentioned, yes, today to replant 1 hectare of tea, it takes 5 years. You have to uproot the tea, then we clean out the land and we have a process of rehabilitation where we grow special rehabilitation grass that rehabilitates the soil for 2 years. Then once we plant again 2 or 3 years of immature period, what we call, and then it comes into plucking at the 5th year. And then the next 2 or 3 years is a formative stage. Actually, till about the first prune, that's about 10 years, it's not at optimum. So basically, if you replant, you need to wait for about 10 years to get a reasonable crop. And the TRI has done studies and found that it takes 35 years to recover the cost of investment. So that is the problem there. In the first instance, we are not reluctant. We are commercial managers, so we look at the cost benefit and we do things. Second thing is we see the labor availability. I told you that currently the plantation sector, not only in the big companies, even the smallholders, are finding it extremely difficult to do the minimum of 4 rounds of the already existing VP fields. So when we can't optimize the available asset, why should anyone go and put money on an asset that we know for sure that we cannot even make half the use? Thirdly, the span of control that the regional plantation has, we have about another 20 years. So we have been repeatedly asking successive governments to give us some indication that these are perennial crop, 150-year crop, to give us an indication that the lease period should be extended, because there are shareholders, and when they invest money, they look at all these aspects. Because if you go and put a crop that we have to hand over in 22 years, the impairment cost is so high that it makes the business unviable. So there are these practical issues. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, some of the tea land is better suited for oil palm, better suited for commercial forestry, better suited for export agriculture crops like cinnamon, better suited for rubber in certain areas. Now even rubber, if you recall, I'm just digressing a little, Horan area was famous in the past for rubber. But today, because of climate change and because of development through reservoirs and such, it's a very highly humid area with high rainfall. It is completely unsuitable for rubber. Within a 50-year span, the whole climate has changed, and the area that was suited for rubber in the past is not suitable now. Likewise, the smallholder sector, because of the high temperatures and the low country climate, a tea bush will give optimum yield for about 30 years if you husband it well. But now about 70 to 80% of that land area is reaching that critical point, and the rate of replanting, theoretically at least, they should replant 3%, like what you do in rubber, which we have done in rubber. It is not happening because of so many reasons. It's not the reluctance of the people engaged. There are practical issues, finance, then the availability of labor and climate change, the assistance and the markets. You will notice that when the tea industry, when the prices are good, all the abandoned tea lands are being plucked. Now, case in point is rubber. Now, about 10 years back, we got 150 million kilos of rubber. But if you look at last 7 or 8 years, we came down to 50 to 75 million kilos because the rubber price was 1/3 of the price we got in the past. So they just abandoned the rubber. But again, now the rubber prices are high. Everybody goes back and taps the rubber that they abandoned. So it's very cyclical and it's very seasonal. And as I told at the outset, the success and the long-term growth of the industry is dependent on the price the producer gets. That's a push factor for him to engage in that kind of a cultivation.
It's a question coming from a lady called Sashini, who works for Smithline Beecham. She's an MBA student. She's saying, Dr. Rajadurai, you are former chairman, Planters Association, you're group managing director of one of the top companies in Sri Lanka. What made you select tea as a career?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I'll be very honest. 2 reasons. I shared this recently with my managers. One is I was actively engaged in sports. I studied at Trinity College, Kandy. I got triple colors of hockey land. I represented Sri Lanka schools in street sports. So basically, I was a keen sportsman, loved the outdoor life. And although I got job opportunities in Colombo, something within me wanted outdoor life, and planting at that time in the 1980s was one of the top jobs. Either you join the mercantile sector in Colombo, the forces, or the planting. There were no other job opportunities. The universities were far and few in 83. When I left school, only 1% of those who did the A-levels got entrance to the university. So I naturally gravitated to planting because of outdoor life, and all my life I have been involved in sports. So I thought that is the best job that I could have.
There's a question coming from Lasanta. He's a planter at Kotegala Plantations. He's also doing this master's at Staffordshire, and he's saying the cost of production in the world, the highest happens to be in Sri Lanka. What is your advice as to how this could be managed?
I think I have been very, very consistent and vocal in promoting ever since I was a PA chairman, even now, that we need to change the 150-year-old colonial era model of wages. We are an attendance-based wage model. Just to explain that, if any worker comes to work at 8:30 and goes off at 5:30, 8 hours work, irrespective of the output, we are mandated to, by statute, to pay him the full wage. And then we are mandated to give 300 days wages with so many other attendant benefits, the best in all the tea economies. A lot of countries come and study our tea industry, not for its efficiency or output, but for the social benefits we give our workers. So unless and until we change this model where the worker also plays a system, I mean, because of the very strong union influence, which precludes any initiatives for improvement of productivity. Unfortunately, the workers over 150 years have built up a dependent mentality, an entitlement mindset. So it's a real challenge for us to change this. It's like setting concrete. It's a challenge. But I think that most of the companies now, I think all credit to the managers on the properties, they have broken through, and now we have introduced what you call a revenue share model. It's another name for productivity-based wage, like what we do in the smallholder sector. Why is the smallholder sector so successful? The smallholders are even today, getting about 30 rupees per kilo. If they come and perform the same output as the plantation workers of plucking 20 kilos, they'll only end up with 600 rupees. But today, the smallholders are plucking 30, 35 kilos. And wherever the plantation companies have introduced this revolutionary model, for the want of a better name, the workers are plucking 35, 40 kilos. We have enough evidence because our people are plucking 35, 40 kilos. When we introduce that system, there's a lot of resistance naturally because the unions and other stakeholders want the workers dependent, and they will lose the stage if the workers go away from this productivity attendance based to the productivity based system. But I think it's inevitable in the long term. With a shortage of workers, the workers also would prefer to be self-employed, self-managed entrepreneurs, like in the smallholder sector. Only catch is the workers won't be able to own the land because the land is owned by the government. But we can assign blocks of land as we are doing now. They can't own it, neither can we, because it's the government land. And we give all the logistical, technical, managerial input, and they maintain the block, and we pay them on productivity. And we have enough evidence. We keep on challenging everybody. Come and look at the books. The workers are earning 35, 40, and we had cases where the workers earn 80, 90,000 rupees. It's flexi time. He's not bound by strict supervision. And sometimes the people who are reluctant to come and present themselves as the master, as a planter's son, you'd know, youngsters who have some level of education think that they should not be supervised by uneducated Kanganis. So they would prefer to work on their own. So this is the way forward for us.
There's a good question coming, Dr. Rajadori, from Gayan, who works at Brandix. He heads marketing. He says, how can we get a better rate for our exports? And what about the global marketing campaign that Ceylon Tea was going to do?
Right. It is non-negotiable that we need to get a better value for our tea. The first step is we have to move up the value chain. We cannot export 50% of our product, which so much of effort, so much of commitment, so much of hard work goes in the bulk form. So that responsibility, as I told earlier, is in the hands of the buying and trading fraternity. That sort of baton cannot be given to us. We are doing far more than adequate in the supply chain. They must search for new markets, new products, differentiate the ways of selling the tea, not the traditional way, and strengthen the existing markets. In our case, we are losing the present premium markets like Japan, right? And then tea is not only for as a beverage. There are multiple uses of tea, which I'm not going to explain now, as a health drink, as a medical, so many things. So they have to look at ways other than drinking tea as a traditional beverage. Instant tea is a big thing. Then they have other flavored tea. So these are what the young people are looking at. And I think our marketing part of the industry must definitely accelerate, because there is very little we can do. We cannot flog a tired horse. I mean, we are extracting the maximum. I mean, a lot of people think that our productivity we are low. It's true, because our productivity in Sri Lanka is about 1,500 kilos. But look at the highly productive, so-called productive countries like India and Kenya. Their national productivity is only 2,000 kilos. It's not 2 or 3 times that of ours. That is only because of the individual labor productivity. It's very high. In Kenya, it's about 60 kilos. In India, it's about 35 kilos, as opposed to 18 kilos in Sri Lanka. So if you put a Kenyan guy, of course, everything is different. I'm just saying for comparison. So if we improve our productivity, we can move up the productivity ladder. And of course, if we improve our marketing, we should be able to get a higher price for our tea. That in turn will flow back to the producer. That will encourage him to engage in the industry, because it's very viable, and it's an industry that you can earn every day, 300 days of the year, unlike any other country. So this is a very good industry if the government supports us with all the infrastructure and facilities.
Dr. Rajadori, can I turn the discussion to Edward Hempel,
Yes.
who is the chairman of Carbon Keepers UK in Sri Lanka, and he's an expert when it comes to crop growth technology and applications of used in tea industry. So what is your view from, the discussion and what you heard from one of the top planters of Sri Lanka? So your view, please.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And I feel very humbled to follow in the footsteps to speak after Dr. Rajadurai. My interest is in the field of where we can help with all of the new technologies that are coming on stream. And I think that they are having revolutionary effects on agriculture across the world, including in the tea industry, but largely in countries where you have flatter land, etc. So there are all sorts of subtleties and complications based around the Sri Lankan tea production that I have to bow to the years and years of experience that is in the field there. However, there are new techniques of monitoring using technology, so particularly remote sensing, artificial intelligence, etc., where we can now look down from a satellite and drones, and we can, for instance, do precision agriculture, which would save potentially in both labor and inputs, fertilizer and chemicals and pesticides, etc., fungicides. And so what it enables us to do is look at a field of tea and see where there is stress from either from lack of chemical fertilizer, requirement particularly for things like nitrates, and also for where there's stress from pests, etc. And then one can enable. Particularly, I was very interested to hear about the revenue share models, because you'd be able to your pluckers earning 90,000 a year would easily be able to afford a mobile phone that could position them to precisely put the inputs that are required. And the benefits of this then would be potentially saving of labor, certainly saving of chemical inputs, and there's also a saving to the environment from that. So it would mean that the environment would receive less chemical inputs, which perhaps we could put this forward to the government as a face-saving measure. Here we are, we're moving in the right direction environmentally, because that's clearly where they're coming from. But at the same time, it's so important that we keep up productivity. We need to have at least the bare minimum of inputs. Therefore, why don't we use a system that will save on the inputs, save on the environment, save on labor? It seems like a win-win-win. I don't know what you think. Yeah.
Before I ask Dr. Rajadori to give his view, is there some country which has used this technology? And do you have a case in point which it has supported the overall productivity?
Yeah. Yes, it's very new. It's been working now for a couple of years in Kenya, where they're having very good results. Of course, Kenyan tea industry is different from the Sri Lankan tea industry. And we very much need to move forward to doing some trials here as soon as possible, which I'm in talks with certain people, and we look forward to seeing how it can help in Sri Lanka. We're very positive that it should do, but until we practically try it, we don't know for sure, of course.
Dr. Rajadori, what do you think of this particular technique?
I think I also concur with what he said. In fact, already in Sri Lanka, we have started this. If I go back to the very basic, instead of traditional weighing with a round scale, we have what you call an electronic weighing system, where the pluckers have a RFID card, and the moment you weigh your leaf in the field, the accurate to the last decimal figures are entered into the payroll. So the plucker has the inherent confidence that no one can sort of cheat or mark her down. Because that is one of the fundamental issues. When we have almost 25,000 workers in our 3 companies, we have, by the 11 o'clock the next day, we know the output of each and every worker and each and every field. So that technology is already in Sri Lanka, and it has motivated the workers, because they know that somebody cannot be given the output that they have plucked. So that's one of the secrets to success. Second thing, your technology, we use drone technology for spraying. It's in infancy. There are some practical issues, the load date and the duration, and the GIS technology that you're talking of, the use of a satellite. Yes, we have done that. At the moment, the cost is a little prohibitive to see cost benefits, but perhaps if we can get scale and do this, there's a possibility. We as Hayleys Plantations have done a lot of these things and gone into the use of information technology for management and for identification, and it has given us very good results. So much so that we were awarded globally and locally for this innovation at the National HR Conference also. So it's been in practice for some time now.
I think Dr. Rajadori, I think Mabroctes, no, is UN
Yes.
Global Compact certified and Rainforest Alliance.
Yes.
And I think it's one of the distinctiveness of Hayleys Plantations. There's a very interesting question coming from Ishan. He's an engineer by profession. And he's saying, if you have to select a career once again, would you become a tea planter?
Of course, without any doubt. I just thank God because I'm blessed to be in this industry, blessed to enjoy everything that the industry has to offer. And I really enjoyed every moment of my work. It's not work any longer. Initially, everyone, when you are young, we have to work hard and establish ourselves. But ever since then, it's nothing but fun. Work is fun for me. I really enjoy working as a planter and to be able to contribute.
There's Manoj from London Stock Exchange asking a very, very interesting question. He said, "This is the first time I met a tea planter who is a MBA qualified and a doctor. What made you become technically savvy apart from being an agricultural expert?" Very interesting question.
Yes, thank you for the question. But I must tell Manoj, okay, when we started planting in the 1980s, as I told, we had only few universities and 1% of the people who passed A levels got entrance to the university. I too got university entrance. But when I said I want to do planting, my father never said a word. Over time, I shared this very personal. Over time, I realized as I became a parent myself, I have 3 children who excelled in academics. I realized that I needed to repay a debt because he was a government servant. He sacrificed a lot, probably spent all his wealth and assets, whatever he had on education. So I thought of a debt, a repayment sort of a thing. And I did my professional exams and NIPM and then my degrees. And at only now, it's very, very interesting that you asked this question. Only about 2 months back, my wife and my family knew why I was pursuing an academic, how shall I say, qualifications. So then only now I made a mistake there. Should I explain to them? I said, no, I felt that as a parent, my parents sacrificed and I needed to pay that debt back. So that was my motivation. Of course, when I started, I used the knowledge, the experience and the exposure that I got from my academic qualifications. And I'm very, very interested in developing skills. Is just to let the house know that in Hayleys Plantations, we have at every level huge amount of investment. During the pandemic, we doubled or trebled our investment in training and development. So much so, even last 2 years, we took 30 managers, specially designed courses to Japan for planters. So I am a very, very keen follower of believing that knowledge is not for the sake of acquiring it, it's to be practiced and to share. And as a result, the person will add value to himself. And thereby, in our industry, we lead thousands of people. We have a significant opportunity to enhance the life and the quality of life of all those who are working with us.
Doctor, there's a question from Sarat Sirisena. He's saying, a planter, he says, is there some way that the government can put a stipulation, a ceiling on bulk exports? Is that one way out?
I think governments, again, I have to caution, governments cannot, how shall I say, mandate trade. It should be based on supply and demand and market forces. So I believe the best thing that I would like to, we have too many regulations. We have too many mandates, too many rules, and which are good at times. But I believe the free trade, the cost benefit, and mutual benefits should come into play in terms of the profitable industry such as tea. That is why I keep on saying that equitable share of the gains from the tea industry must flow down to the producers who probably do about 90% of the really, really difficult hard work in terms of costs, in terms of challenges to quality, in terms of challenges to food grade certification and the weather effect, and in sustaining the industry and paying the salaries.
Dr. Rajadori, just last two questions, sir. I know this is a very important day because it's a 50th top CEO discussion in the MBA diaries, and you're the 50th, which is very significant for the overall as a brand. The question is coming from a graduate from the Academy of Design. She's Rohi, who's studying for the master's program at Staffordshire. And she's saying, we have heard so many case studies of how the pandemic has changed a lot of people's lives in the workplace. Can you share us in a tea estate how you all adjusted to the pandemic? I think it's a very interesting question.
Actually, with the onset of the pandemic, we stopped work for 3 days when the government declared a curfew. But to the eternal credit, and I salute the planters at the time when the government stopped, and then when we restarted, because ours is a very important export industry, all our planters and of course the staff took it upon themselves. They, at that time we didn't have the vaccines. When there was curfew, when there was travel restriction, they took it upon themselves. They went out of their way, exposing themselves. They got food. They got, in terms of money, advances, wages, in terms of medical supplies, other sort of a standard things like soap, face mask, all the things, all the health and safety protocols that has become the norm now. 1.5 years ago, they took the initiative and got it done. And as a result, if you recall, up till about September, October, a million people, a population of 1 million people resident living in close quarters, close contact. We didn't have a single COVID case. So it's all credit to the managers on the ground. They coordinated with the government, health and other authorities. And so much so, they made food packs and put it in bags and gave it to the workers' doorstep. So this is ours is the only industry. Not only did we offer full employment without any retrenchment, normalcy, we sustained the industry in terms of food, health, and whatever other amenities that were required. And we ensured that no one succumbed to this COVID, and we looked after our population. I think we got a lot of help from the PHTT, Plantation Human Development Trust, government agencies, but all in all, 90% it is a manager's dedication. There are selfless service that help the industry to sustain, and we maintain near normalcy. And of course, during this time, one initiative is that the electronic auction took place. So that was a necessity born out of the situation, and that has now been regularized. It has been a help to the industry. So workers also at this time listened to it because there was no unions, there was no government officials. Managers looked after a population of over 1 million. So new learning, there was better communication, better understanding. The workers listen to the managers. I hope and pray that this trend continues for the overall benefit of the industry, so that the workers knew that their managers on the property looked after them. That's a key learning, and a lot of education, awareness, a lot of good things happened. A lot of initiatives, particularly children were confined to home. I mean, we have written enough about what happened during the COVID. But bottom line is that in spite of the fact that huge, I mean, the plantation community, they live in close quarters with the cultural differentiations. They had their functions, they have their ceremonies. But in spite of all that, we managed to keep the deaths or casualties to a bare minimum. Now, at the moment, almost 90% are vaccinated and almost 85% have got the second dose as well.
A very interesting comment, Doctor. I'm sorry, last two questions. Yeah, he's Kushan from Commercial Bank. He's saying that you're absolute brand ambassador of the tea industry. You talked about data points, you talked about agriculture, you talk about the modern science of using drone technology to drive productivity up. I mean, you're not a typical agricultural partner, but you're a person who is using the MBA in a correct spirit. And I was absolutely humbled to know that you want to do what is right for your dad by wanting to get your PhD. What is your advice to us who is living in a country which is bankrupt?
Okay. Okay. Let me put it like this to all the youngsters who are listening. I think first thing that we have to realize is we can't control everything in life, right? There is bound to be some disappointments. But if you take a balance sheet, I think we have got far more blessings than we deserve. I strongly believe that. Perhaps we may have had a few unfair treatments, but if you take as a whole, I think each and every one of us can count the blessings, the benefits that we don't deserve that we got. So always be grateful, whatever your belief or whatever your belief of God is. I believe that we have to be grateful to God and we must have an attitude of gratitude. If you really analyze, I analyze my life, I have got far more than I deserve. So that is number one. Second thing is we believe that even in a country like Sri Lanka, I believe that if you work hard, if you commit yourself, if you strive to improve yourself, may not be immediately, but the system will reward you in the long term. So don't lose hope. I mean, it's like a tea plant. You will not get crop overnight. But if you really put your heart and soul and do the right thing, the system will eventually reward you. So don't get disappointed. Don't get upset when disappointment. Sometimes somebody might be favored about you. That's all right. Just pick yourself up and move on. Suck it up and just move on. So work hard. Hard work never killed anybody, right? Be committed and the system will eventually reward you, and always do the right thing. One thing I tell my youngsters is always in Sri Lanka, cut the coat according to the cloth. If you can't afford it, you don't have to feel shy. You don't have to feel bad. You have to just say no. We have to feel bad. We have to feel shy if we do something wrong, if we do something that we are not supposed to do in order to keep up with the Jones. So three things, three takeaways I would like to give is you can't control your life. Certain disappointments will happen, but don't worry. I think if you take a balance sheet, we have got far more than we all deserve. Work hard, the system will reward you.
Last question, Dr. Rajadori. What advice would you give Roshan Rajadori, who is 21 years old and just starting life?
Very, very difficult question. I really don't know how to answer that. I don't know how whether I'll be any different. I've had a fantastic time, and I'm sorry, I really don't know how to answer that question. I've been really blessed, and I have nothing to complain about.
Thank you very much, Roshan. It's wonderful chatting with you, and I mean, you've been a friend. I remember 10 years serving on the tea board, and how closely we work together. It's absolutely fantastic chatting with you. My thanks to Edward Hempel, Chairman, Carbon Keepers UK, and Sri Lanka for stepping in and sharing a few thoughts all the way from London. Thank you very much, sir. And Roshan, it's fantastic. Let me hand over to Kaushali to do the honors. Kaushali.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a revelation to me also. Thank you very much, Rohan, and everybody listening in. I appreciate you. They spent a very valuable evening. Thank you so much.
Kaushali, over to you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Indeed, a rare combination of hope, creativity, education, and humbleness. So thank you very much for that knowledge sharing session, Dr. Rajadurai. I'm sure students, we will not be learning this in the theories. We will not be learning this in a typical book that we will be reading in. this is life experience, that postgraduate education that we would want to impart in each and every young soul. And that's our purpose as APIT Sri Lanka. So thank you very much for that. And this brings us to another end of another story in this diary. And I would also want to thank Mr. Edward for hopping in today and adding your expertise and concepts with us. It's amazing to have you on board as well. So we would wind up for today, and we'll meet back again in another session in another week's time. So we mark our 50th session today. And thank you very much for everyone who had been on board so far. And have a lovely evening, have a lovely day, have a lovely morning, and good night from Sri Lanka.
Thank you, and good night to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Roshan.
My pleasure.
Thanks,
always.
Edward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kaushali and Rajiv.